I'm Keith Martin alongside Katie Zantippe, Craig Wienitzki, and Brian Connors. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about role-playing games, different genres of, from fantasy, sci-fi, some of the pretty cool personal horror stuff from the 90s, like Vampire the Masquerade or Werewolf the Apocalypse, and such. So probably going to start off with some good old-fashioned granddaddy of them all D&D. For the basic D&D stuff, you have your standard kind of fantasy, sword, sorcery stuff. What about that kind of setting, did you guys like?
I personally like all the different creatures that you can meet and just the different people and the different roles. It just makes for such interesting characters that you get to interact with and make your own as you're role-playing.
I think the good thing about back in the day is you could just make up any mythos you want, use anything that you've ever heard from any story, book, movie, anything you want, and just make out a story, campaign, however you want to go.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the original D&D conception was kind of Tolkien by way of Lovecraft, but, there's so much more you can do with it, and I think, it's a fairly flexible system, so it can cover the whole multiverse without really having to create, alternate plot lines.
Right, yeah, because I started out way back in the day with, basic D&D, red box, read this book first.
I think everyone of a certain age who was ever into it had the red box.
Oh yeah, and so it was pretty simple because the rule system was very simple, in the sense of you didn't have all like the more modern games now. You have a lot of the options that I sometimes feel kind of bogged down the game a little bit with kind of paralysis by analysis. You get I have to spend all these skill points. I got to do all this. I got to do all that. But going back to what Katie said, I do like being someone who's designed different campaign settings and game worlds and stuff like that for all my players. I do find that that's a lot of fun, and the fantasy genre I think really lends that because of the imagination to it. You don't really have to, because of the existence of magic and all that stuff in your campaign settings, then you can really kind of freelance it and just kind of go wild with it.
One of the interesting things is if you really want to be analytical about it, the biology of some of these creatures is just fascinating to think about. Illithids, Tarask. I mean, these are just creatures that completely defy anything we know in the real world, and yet, just their basic descriptions is just fascinating.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And also, some of these creatures are probably not even possible. Never mind that they don't exist; they probably couldn't exist in the real world. So it's nice having a fantasy setting because, like as you said, there's magic, so anything really goes.
A wizard did it, worked great.
Oh yeah, the wizard did. That's your standard plot line.
Solves everything. Because you actually have a wizard who probably did it. He's the guy that everyone's trying to kill now because the wizard did it.
Well, that's how they figure the gelatinous cube got there.
A wizard did.
Some wizard was screwing around with oozes trying to clean up his mess, and as we know, there is always a 10 by 10 room for Jell-O.
That's right. You also have something that's kind of neat was kind of talking about the genres too is like a sci-fi genre for role-playing games. But again, kind of circling back to D&D a little bit was back in the 90s they did Spelljammer.
I've heard a few stories about how that came about.
Oh yeah, no, that was a total joke.
I think I've heard the name, but I don't think I've ever seen it.
Well, it's kind of D&D in outer space, and basically the idea was that the person who was running TSR was in the process of running it into the ground, partially because she thought people playtesting on company time was a waste of time.
Oh,
so
yes.
in return for being treated like that, they decided to come up with an expansion where it did not matter one bit whether any of it actually worked. They were just trying to put in as many cool, cheesy ideas as they could come up with.
They just threw everything against the wall and whatever was going to stick. for instance, space hamsters.
Whoa. Kind of wish I had got my hands on that.
A giant space hamster. And you had a ship. Because what they did in Spelljammer was you had ships that, were kind of either really cool looking, like, like a squid ship or something that had like a big tentacle thing off the front of it or something like that. But they're
Flying Cthulhu?
Yeah, basically. or like the Spelljammer itself looks like a big giant manta ray flying through space. But you also have, like standard ships that were, that look like normal seagoing vessels, but they would fly through space. But one of the ships, I think of gnomish design or whatever, had big giant hamster wheels on the side.
Oh my
And
God.
it was propulsed by giant space hamsters. They ran in the wheels and made it go forward.
Because clearly a wizard did something with there, because there's no way that...
Magic powers the ships.
Because spinning wheels in space, last time I checked.
All the ships have what's called a spell jamming helm, and a wizard or a cleric will sit in it and power the ship.
I definitely think I heard about this from an old buddy of mine in school. He was the one that first introduced me to Dungeons & Dragons. And before that, I only had electronic role-playing games, Nintendos and stuff.
Right, yeah.
And I remember the very first character I created was a wizard, and I rolled the little triangle, the four-sided die for your HP,
for your hit points.
and I had like a 2.
Well,
and I was like, how can you only have 2 HP? That doesn't... like, I was used to games where you had like 30 or 40 to start with. I was like, how am I going to live, ever? And he's like, oh, you're a wizard.
Stand behind the fighter.
I was like, what the...
Get in the back.
And I remember mentioning something about Spelljammers. I thought when I was in junior high that was the coolest thing in the world, wizards in space, but now I realize it's probably not so.
Well, no, I actually kind of enjoyed Spelljammer. I thought it was kind of fun. No, it's not my favorite setting, but it was a good one. Probably my favorite setting is probably Dragonlance, but
I kind of like Eberron.
yeah, I was never a big fan of Eberron. That was kind of later on for me.
Yeah, well, it's definitely different. I mean, you got that whole noir steampunk aspect.
Yeah, I had a lot of that stuff. I mean, obviously, I mostly grew up on Forgotten Realms.
Yeah.
I mean, that was pretty much the main campaign setting when I started playing. Switching over to science fiction, because right now you have a lot of games based on movies. A lot of time, so that, for instance, Star Wars, role-playing game for Star Wars. A few iterations of that. There was one done by
West End Games.
West End Games, the D6 system.
Played that in college.
Yeah, I played that in high school.
That was pretty epic. Actually, it was actually so good that the core materials were considered canon by Lucasfilm.
Yeah. Now, what do you think in movies like that, or Star Trek? And I also have at home, I have a Buck Rogers role-playing game.
God.
The 25th century role-playing game. Buck Rogers in the 25th century. It was done by TSR. Basically a modified Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition rule set. But what do you think those types of settings lend themselves to role-playing and and the creative process? Like, how do you, what do you think about that?
I think that stuff's pretty neat.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know much about the Dungeons and Dragons offshoots. I was much bigger into the D20 systems of White Wolf or
That's D10 actually. Yeah.
D10
Storyteller
D10.
system.
Wow.
Storyteller system. We're gonna get there shortly.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, I know that
that stuff too.
a lot of my friends and we'd spend a lot of weekends just testing out random things. Like people would convert animes or movies or God knows what into these systems, and it just, even if you play the same thing over and over and over again, even though you're changing it up with different stories and settings, every once in a while it's just fun to throw something for a loop and try something completely out of the ordinary.
I remember way back in high school, we would convert Transformers into D&D stats.
That'd be sweet.
It's like Megatron with D&D numbers. Okay, you have like a 25 strength and how many hit points is he? Probably about 600 hit points. So.
Well, if it's a setting that you really enjoy, you were really into the movie or the show or whatever the campaign is based on, it's a fun way to immerse yourself more into that setting and really give yourself a chance to imagine what it might be like to actually live in that setting.
Yeah, like playing Star Wars, I always wanted to be a Jedi, and then you can be one. It's pretty cool.
Plus, one of the nice things about science fiction is that when all else fails, you can fall back on Arthur C. Clarke. Any sufficiently advanced science is indistinguishable from magic.
Right.
Joe Straczynski arguably took that a little too seriously with the techno-mages in Crusade.
Well, if you kind of going on that thought is we was mentioning White Wolf before, Mage the Ascension, which was a great game. I love Mage the Ascension. Fantastic game.
So much easier to play in the Dark Ages, though. You didn't have to explain as much stuff scientifically.
Well, yeah, you didn't have to worry about trying to do coincidental magic. But
a friend of mine had a mage who was specialized in fire, so he always kept with him explosives or fire sticks of some sort, because anything he would do, people would be like, huh? He'd be like, oh, I threw dynamite down that hallway. That's why it exploded into a ball of fire. Haven't you thrown that dynamite 3 times?
I had so many people abuse the coincidental magic. Well, coincidentally.
Hey, you know, if you come up with a good enough reason, you kind of got to let it go.
But going on that is obviously the technocracy from Mage, and I'm a big fan of the technocracy. Like the Void Engineers is probably my favorite convention, and just all that. But the idea that any magic, sufficiently couched in science with the technocracy becomes mundane science. Like at one point, television was a magic effect in that game, and then eventually it gets accepted by the sleepers, humans, as as fact, and then it just works without any chance of paradox or anything bad happening.
Paradox isn't going to rip you apart.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's it.
The technocracy actually brings an interesting point about things like alignment and general morality in games, because if you read through the second edition Mage book, you really do get the sense after a while that the writers really screwed up on the technocracy badly. I mean, they kept trying to paint them as bad guys, but as they later admitted when they brought out a technocracy source book, they really aren't. They're just different and mutually exclusive in a way from the traditions.
Well, it's almost like a thing in White Wolf anyway, is that moral relativism anyhow. Yeah. Where no one is really as good as they seem and no one is as bad as they seem.
That's why Vampire is at heart a game about politics.
Right, yeah. And Vampire is great. I mean, as far as those storytelling games goes, obviously that was the first one that I started playing, and
Although I will say I always wanted to run a campaign which has a bunch of vampires in a car driving somewhere at night, and they get pulled over, and the officer just happens to have a UV pen light.
Ow!
It's like, ow, what?
Aggravated damage.
Yeah.
Roll of dice. Oh, you can't soak it. I'm sorry.
Fortunately, it's only a spot on the back of your hand.
Check off a point of your 7 life.
Yeah. So, but
That's the only thing that bugged me about that.
So then going with the White Wolf, the genre there, that the personal horror genre for Vampire. What I kind of liked about that was, I'm not really big into all the angst. That wasn't really my thing. But so in the White Wolf thing, how they have the gothic punk is the theme and the mood. Yeah. Mine was usually a little more gothic, but not quite as much punk all the time. But I didn't, I wasn't really into all the personal melodrama a lot of the time, which is mainly why I played Sabbath. But
yes.
My favorite clan is the Lost and Bra clan. But
I like the Lasombra Antitribu. Think about it.
Right.
If you're a Lasombra Antitribu, either absolutely everyone or absolutely no one will screw with you.
Right, because either you're insanely powerful,
or you're just walking around with a red shirt and a target on the back.
Exactly. But
I think I always liked the Malkavians.
Yes.
That was one of my favorite characters that I had a long-standing series of games with. A guy who would talk to inanimate objects.
Mm-hmm.
Best Malkavian derangement I've ever heard of. Psychiatric hypochondriac. He literally had every derangement in the book.
Nice.
And his party members didn't know it. They thought he was just faking it.
So in a game like Vampire, where role-playing is extremely important in that one, rather than mechanics. A lot of those other systems like D&D and any of the offshoots, the D20 system, or for like Star Wars or whatever. It's more mechanics driven, where particularly the newer stuff where it's like you could play it without a GM because they've like legislated the GM right out of the game, I feel. But with like 4th edition D&D and stuff, it's almost like
I'm not up to par with any of the new stuff, unfortunately.
For that's what they've almost like, you know, written the game master right out of the game. It's like you don't even need one. But
well, let's have the fun.
Exactly. But in the White Wolf games in particular, you had a lot of interpersonal stuff.
Yeah.
You know, because with the morality, with, you know, humanity, with, you know, and the idea of having to struggle with that, you know, I thought was, at the time, I thought was really interesting, you know.
Yeah.
You can only shoot so many innocent civilians before your teammates start to go, is he going to shoot us next?
Exactly.
We should kind of get away from this guy.
Somebody pointed out once, many years ago, that Vampire is one of those games where, you know, staying up till sunrise to commit suicide really can be a valid in-character game choice.
Yeah. I you know, playing a game with someone, you know, in, you know, way back, you know, where we, you know, got into the characters and you're doing it, you know, and then it's like, okay, you know, I've had, you know, characters who are like, you know, they were playing and, you know, the idea of their character was they just hated themselves, you know, and that was like their whole thing. They just hated what they were, and, you know.
Ironically, I think, you mentioned, you know, moving away from mechanics, but one of the things I always found interesting about Storyteller is that the mechanics, I mean, given a large enough bag of D10s, you could...
You never need more than really 20.
Yeah, but you could really pick, you know, and it's like if you needed to roll for a skill, I mean, you don't even have to look it up. You can just kind of guess based on what's on the character sheet what you need,
yeah,
and kind of bullshit your way out of it.
Right. You can totally fudge
good
it.
round whole number.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, because that's like switching back a little bit to older editions of Dungeons and Dragons. You had, you know, like in basic D&D, you know, it was just basically your combat numbers. That's really all that mattered. And then as the game evolved, you ended up with like secondary skills. Oh, okay, I can be a blacksmith, you know. And then when second edition rolled about, you had your non-weapon proficiencies. You had proficiency slots, and then that evolved into, in third edition, to the skill points, and that big giant list of skills that you have. And then that changed, and when fourth came out to just, I'm trained in this skill, you know, and you get a +5 to it without, you don't have to spend the points, which is kind of, I kind of like that. Because I don't like the whole min-maxing idea of skills. I think it takes a long time. You know, when you're creating a character, it's like, oh, I gotta spend all these skill points.
There was a friend of mine that we definitely nicknamed a red mage.
Oh yeah.
Because he would min-max his characters out for no. He took the exact amount of hits against himself. I can't remember their flaws, and then so he would have enough merits.
Oh yeah, merits and flaw system.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was horribly in my life.
Oh man, that system was so broken.
Have you ever seen the webcomic Darths and Droids?
No.
It's basically a bunch of characters creating the plot of Star Wars as a role-playing game. It also represents literally the only unironic use ever of the phrase, Jar Jar, you're a genius. And one of the characters is...
Is that possible?
It makes sense in context.
He did create the Empire, so cheers.
Trust me, it makes sense, but you have to read through the comic. But one of the characters, Pete, is the one who plays R2-D2, and how he wound up with this short little droid with no comprehensible voice was exactly that, min-maxing on flaws and benefits.
That's actually really good.
Of course, they also pulled Anakin Skywalker completely out of nowhere by shooting him up with midichlorian plasma.
All right, so switching to other types of role-playing games too, like you have your standard tabletop D&D stuff, or Star Wars, or D20 system, storyteller system, all that. I'm going to touch on this briefly because it's kind of funny, but live action role-playing. Which is,
oh yeah, we all did a little bit of something like that, I think. Maybe not all.
Not all of us.
I didn't, but I did go to an SCA meeting once.
SCA is interesting. A friend of mine, Ron, does that, and that looks actually is not quite the same as live action role playing because you're actually beating the hell out of each other.
True.
Oh, wow. I kind of got involved in it before I really knew that it would be called live action role playing. Me and my friends.
Well, in White Wolf, it's called Mind's Eye Theater.
Oh, well, there you go. Everyone's got their own way to do it. But like me and my friends would just take something we wanted, a storyline or a game idea, and we would just assume our own characters or assume characters of the story, and then just play our own version out. And we had fun with it. Sometimes we were out in the backyard for hours, and eventually we met this other friend of ours who told us, they were like, oh yeah, generally this is called LARPing. And we're like, what's that?
We're just playing a game.
And then we started getting more into the fold, and it just made more sense. So
yeah.
Well, I wouldn't really consider it, LARPing unless you are getting into the nitty-gritty rules and inventing restrictions and things.
Right,
if you're just hanging out with your friends and, playing a game in your own little world, I would hesitate to call that LARPing.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't really call it.
yeah, there was arguments of death involved.
But yeah, no, because for instance, with Mind's Eye Theater, there is a codified set of rules, and you did, for resolving skills or whatever, you had to do different things because you had a character sheet and all that stuff.
Oh, okay.
But it was just played out. Like I think they did a version of rock paper scissors to do like resolving like attacks and disputes and
So
stuff.
3-sided die.
Yeah, roll 3-sided die. I think in like the fantasy ones, like when you cast a spell, you throw like a packet of seeds or something.
Yeah.
I hit you with lightning. But
Scuff your feet on the carpet.
yes, and then zap them.
I love the power of electricity. It's brilliant stuff.
And there's also like more tactical games. Again, kind of going on to the tabletop gaming more than role-playing games like Warhammer or things like that. I know most of you, I don't know about you, but most of you probably haven't played it at all.
I've played the computer version.
Yes, the computer version.
I have a friend who's obsessed with the tabletop version, and I learned
the
everything through him, and I was like, that's enough for me.
But
I know I've not played it, but I know some of the backstory, and
that's the best part.
I have to.
the fluff is great. Yeah, the fluff from Games Workshop is very good.
Although I have to wonder what kind of downers they were on when they came up with that.
Yeah, well, it's so bad. Everything is just horrible.
I like the 40K stuff. Some of it is just such a mix of hilarious and depressing. You're like,
well, the thing with exactly. The thing with 40K is that it's just everything is bad. It's like White Wolf.
Yeah.
It's like everything in White Wolf. It's like we're on the precipice of disaster. Like
the world's about to end.
The end is right there, right around the corner. Never felt more than in Werewolf. Have you played Werewolf?
I did not play Werewolf because I started with Vampire, and werewolves were the bad guys.
Yeah.
They were the big, nasty, 15 strength, lumbering death beasts.
With Vampire, the end of the world, Gehenna or whatever, was looming, but it still felt like it was still far off a little bit. It was still in Werewolf. The apocalypse is right around the corner. I mean, it's on us right now. We are fighting the last battle as we speak.
Man.
That's how they feel. And so, and back to genre a little bit with the horror genre there, they rather than a personal story with Werewolf, it's an external thing because it's the werewolves are fighting for survival against outside forces. Whereas in Vampire, the struggle tends to be more internal. I mean, there's, which lends itself back out to the external politics of the whole vampire society, but
whereas Werewolf is basically breaking shit for a good cause.
Right. So, what do you guys think is the kind of the next step in where role-playing games are going now? I mean, you have D&D Next is kind of in the works. We did a little play testing on that, and I like the system. It's pretty neat. But what do you guys think the future of role-playing games is going?
Well, as you kind of touched on earlier, how the role of the GM is kind of getting downplayed and the game is getting more streamlined. personally, I hope that doesn't happen because some of my best, role-playing experiences have been with different GMs, because depending on the GM, you can have such a different experience. They really change how the game, how the feel of the game is, and what you get out of it, how the game runs, makes such a difference. So I really hope that that isn't taken out in the future.
Because I think the role of the GM is, as storyteller, as referee, as God, like back in the really old days. I mean, and they emphasized that, which was, the GM was, the final arbitrator of everything. If he said it, it goes, and that was it. There was no arguing or complaining. It's just too bad.
Well, strictly speaking, that's still the case. It just depends on the GM.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
And the whiny people that play.
If there's no GM, you can't bribe him with food or whatever to get you what you want.
I mean, I haven't dipped into a lot of the newer edition stuff, but I mean, they always seem to change some rules and whatnot, and you got to change stuff up because otherwise
it gets stale.
Right. I mean, you can't have no evolution of the game since the 80s.
Right.
But at the same time, sometimes it feels like they spend a lot of time cluttering it up, and streamlined is definitely
one of the biggest
advantage.
sins that I see, and I call it a sin because I'm kind of a purist, but is the idea of balance, game balance. Everything has to be balanced.
That's just people whine.
Right. It's like, and I think that you can create balance even in the older systems where they think everything's broken. The wizard's broken. It's like, it's like, well,
he's not broken. He just put an axe through his head.
Just play,
Balance is for strategy games. It doesn't really fit.
It doesn't fit role-playing games, right? And that's part of the whole thing with the evolution of the games is they're becoming almost like a strategy. Like I'm gonna, take the pet project here, beating on 4th edition a little bit, but it's like playing World of Warcraft, an MMO, on the table.
Yeah.
Everything's all push button almost. It's like I have this power here, I can use it over and over and over and over and over and over again.
That's kind of lame.
Right, it's like at will powers. But not all of that's bad, but it just has that feel of I'm playing a game and I'm clicking.
But of course, the flip side of that is when I remember thinking of the wizards from the old versions.
Oh, you were host.
You were like, you cast 2 magic missiles, and you're like, 24 hours later, I hope I don't die.
You just totally blow it all out there really fast, and it's all done.
Yeah,
and
that's it.
Then you get your
pew pew.
Your darts.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah. I don't know. I tend to think. I don't know. I'm getting really esoteric here, but I don't know. I think the whole Dungeons and Dragons Jack Vance magic model has kind of seen its day. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense because I think with Mage with Quintessence and Magic the Gathering with mana, I think it's more a question of, it's like, okay, you can have canned effects, but it's a lot of the times you still. I'm just looking at this from, say, a scientific point of view. You still have to know what effect you want. Like, if you're going to magic a computer out of nowhere, you better be able to get it down to the last circuit.
All right, guys. Well, that's about all we have for time, so we'll wrap this up. Thanks for joining us here on OCDTV. Check us out on Facebook. We have a pretty cool Facebook page. We'd like any feedback, future episode ideas, throw it out there. Thank you and have a good night.